Welcome to the co-host, Adam. It was just his birthday the other day. So I hope you had a great birthday.
Yeah, a
Guillaume,
young 34.
yeah, wow. Those
Still
were the
got a
days.
while to go. Knock on wood.
That would be nice, huh? All right. So Guillaume, please go ahead first.
Hi there. So my question is about intuition and creative work. So Tom, do you have some advice to get more easily into an intuitive state for creative work, like writing a book or a symphony, any great artistic work? I mean, many artists are very humble when they talk about inspiration and where they get their idea. They often talk about the muse or some divine concept um, and inspiration. There's a quote from the Sufi poet Rumi that I just want to um, read right now. He say, "The breeze at dawn has secrets to tell you. Don't go back to sleep. You must ask for what you really want. Don't go back to sleep. People are going back and forth across the door sill where the two worlds touch. The door is round and open. Don't go back to sleep." So that's an interesting quote right there. But how can I open the door? I mean, how can I more easily access an intuitive flow state when I station my physical body in the spot where my dream work wants to happen? I'm all about hard work, but I would like to receive more insight from you, Tom, about shutting down my ego, my intellect, and the tons of inadequacies I have. So just for finishing my long question, why does creative work sometimes feel like something was really difficult? There's a part of the artist's work that often feels like a pregnancy, something long, uncomfortable gestation, wondering if you're gonna have enough money to sustain this child, and finally, you give birth in a lot of suffering. So I guess that's my question today.
Okay, it's interesting that that's the first question because just I don't know, yesterday or day before yesterday, Donna and I sat down and did about an hour and a half video on creativity. So it's and where that comes from and how you get that, and so it's interesting that that's the first thing that comes up. Well, that creativity basically comes out of the intuitive side, the being level side. It has to. It's something you have to own. You have to be. You can't get that from the intellect. But creating a piece of art, whether it's a book or a sculpture or painting or music or anything like that, even just solving a puzzle, coming up with that solution that you're trying to come up with at work that you just can't find. All of those require for you to let go, open up, and connect with your intuitive side. Get into your being level, get out of your intellect. All of that takes place over on the intuitive side of your consciousness. Your consciousness processes data in two ways. One's intellectual and one's intuitive. So it's got two different pathways. And just so happens that our brain is split in two. We've got two different hemispheres. And one of those hemispheres is good at logic, and one of those hemispheres is not. It's good at more right-brained things rather than left-brain things. So it also, though, requires knowledge, which is part of your intellect. If you're going to create something, you also have to have all the the knowledge and information and skill that you develop over time. So if you're going to create a piece of visual art, then you need the skill to do that. You know, the coordination, the sense of perspective, and all the other things that artists learn. So it's not just intuitive, and it's not just intellect. You need both. You need a good grounding. If you're going to solve that problem at work, well, you need to understand the problem. You need to understand what all its parameters are and the players and all the connections. You have to have that in your intellect. But then the actual see the bigger picture, how all the pieces of the puzzle fit together in one bigger picture, that requires your intuitive side. That's the intuition. So they both have to work together. If you want to be more successfully creative, then one, you have to do your homework and gather the information that's important and necessary and significant, and develop the skills, coordination, or just the thinking skills. And once you have that, then you need to connect with the intuitive side, which will take all that information and come up with insights, with connections, with possibilities. And that's then where the creative part comes. So it takes both. It takes an intellect and it takes intuition. If you're just intuitive and never do your homework or never learn very much, then you will be able to get a lot of information, but it really won't make a lot of sense. It'll be a jumble and you won't be able to explain it. You'll just know that I get information and it's usually right and I just use it. But it's hard to put that into a perspective. It's hard to understand why you get this information, how you get this information, how should you apply it, what does it mean, what's its significance. All of that comes from doing your homework earlier and learning. So both of those are required. You need preparation, and then you need intuitive processing to give you that holistic, big picture understanding, because that's really what the intuitive side gives you. It gives you not facts, but it gives you understanding, gives you knowing, gives you connection. That's what the intuitive side does. You connect with things without really trying. And how do you get better at that? You practice. It's just that simple. You just practice. There's no prescription, go through these 10 steps and you will be intuitive. It's not like that. You just have to practice. How did you get your intellect to where it is now, to where it's honed, to where you have skills? You can read, you can write, you know about history, you know about economics, you know about a whole lot of things, which then helps you understand the world. How did that intellect get developed? Well, you've probably been working on it since you were 3 years old or so, developing that intellect. You start with learning the alphabet, learning a few words of vocabulary, and you just keep working on it. It's a part of your life to work on honing and developing that intellect. Well, it needs to be the same thing with the intuitive side. It needs to be part of your life's work to develop that intuitive side, that being level side. And to do that, it takes practice. You have to just be there and do it. And you can't approach it the same way you approach with the intellectual side. In the intellectual side, what you do is you collect a whole lot of facts. That's what the intellect does. It collects a whole lot of facts, and then it kind of analyzes those facts and tries to come up with, what do they mean? You don't do that so much on the intuitive side. Intuitive side is not about facts. Intuitive side is not about logic. It's not even about rationality. It's just about understanding, knowing. finding solutions, connecting. And the things you can get to with the intuition are things you can't get to with the intellect. Now, the intellect and the intuition are somewhat incompatible. If you're in intuitive mode, your intellect generally is just barely working. And when you're in intellectual mode, your intuition is just barely working. Now, that's the way it is for most people most of the time. It's one or the other. You're in one side or you're in the other side. But with practice, you can do both. You can do both at the same time. You can pull those together with practice. And then that's where you're really functioning at your highest level. You have the intuitive side and the intellectual side, and they are working together. And part of the way you do that is by learning to, can't think of the right word in computer speak, but it's basically sampling. You do the intellect, then you do the intuition. You can jump back and forth quickly enough that it really seems like you're doing both together. You get a sense of parallel processing just by going back and forth very quickly, which means they both have to be accessible. If it takes you 15 minutes to get into that intuitive side, well, now that's what slips you into that either or situation. You kind of take all this time, get into the intuitive side, now you're just there. And the intellectual side, we've practiced with that so long, we can jump into our intellect very quickly. But if we can get into that intuitive side, really solidly into that intuitive side in a tenth of a second, then we can jump back and forth. And it's not actually parallel processing. We're not doing them both at the same time, but it's as good as parallel processing because you're just jumping back and forth so quickly that you are essentially doing them both. There's a proper term for that because computers do the same thing. Computers seem like they're doing 20 tasks all at once, but they're not really. They're just doing a little bit of this one and a little bit of that one and a little bit of the next one, but they're going through all 20 like every hundredth of a second. So for you, looking at it from the outside, it looks like they're just parallel processing everything at once, but mostly they're not. Mostly they are, well, that was back when we had one core. When you had just one core in your processor, it could just do one thing at a time. Now we have 14 cores, and depends on how much money you want to spend. We have lots of different cores, and they can do things in parallel. But it's difficult to do true parallel processing because many things come in sequences. You have to do A before you do P, before you do C. You can't do all A, B, and C all at once in parallel because B depends on A and C depends on B. So you have to do them sequentially. Now that's hard to parallel process, but that's great if you can jump back and forth very quickly because then you go ABC, 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 and you can jump back and forth and it looks like you're making progress in all three at the same time. So it's how your consciousness works as well. Your conscious can do some parallel processing, but mostly what it's doing is very quick jumping between those two main ways that you process information within your consciousness. So you just practice. And how do you practice? Well, you notice that when people talk about being creative, they talk about being relaxed, they talk about letting go. Often that problem has its solutions when you're not trying to solve it. You have it in your mind, you've been thinking about that problem, but then you just quit and you stop doing that. You go out and watch the sunset or something. You do something else. You relax and just let your mind open, and then pop, the solution comes in. And that's because as long as your intellect was in charge, working on the problem, the intuition is kind of shut out. Now that's the way it is for most people. So you'll find all sorts of tales about the scientist got that aha moment. just as he was falling asleep, just as he was waking up, just, as he started daydreaming, where he let go and just let his mind wander. Okay, that's when the intuition then comes in. But it's really better if you learn to work them together and not have to go to a special place to get your intuition, because that's kind of a break in the process. It doesn't work as smoothly. So quieting your mind, learning to quiet your mind, learning to just open, turn off your intellect, shut down the analysis and the judgment, and you can think in the intuitive side. It's not that the intuitive side doesn't have any thought process, it does. But the thought process in the intuitive side does not judge, does not do analysis, does not compare. It doesn't do any of those things. All it can do for you is direct. It can give you direction. Okay, what the problem I need to solve is so-and-so. All right, I'll open my mind to that problem. Your intuitive mind can give you that kind of direction, because otherwise a lot of people say, well, if I just drift off, well, I've just drifted off. I'm not focused anymore on what I'm doing, and it's fun and it's relaxing, but I don't get anything. You have to also have direction. You have to, that's that little quote that you read, I think said all of it very well. The doorway over to that intuitive side is always open. And most of us, he kept saying, don't fall asleep, wake up. Most of us kind of live our life asleep. We're in zombie mode. We do things just because that's what we do, and that's just how we do it. And we very seldom really pay attention to exactly what we're doing, either on the intellectual or the intuitive side. We just kind of work on autopilot. So it kept saying, don't go to sleep. Pay attention. Be open. That doorway's open. So that's the intuitive side of going, and it's not something you control in the sense like you control your intellect. Okay, I'm going to do analysis now on such and such a thing. You kind of do that purposely. Your intuition, you don't purposely go out and grab intuitive information. You just relax your mind, you open it up, you have an intention for what you want. When you have that intention for what you want, then you just relax and let it come. And it's not a process of going out and grabbing, it's a process of opening and receiving. And I think that's a problem that most people get hung up on, because they want the intuitive process to be just like the intellectual process, which means you go out and get it. And they want to reach out and grab that intuitive, that creative thing. All right, what is that solution? And because that's how their intellect works, they try to make their intuition work like that too. And intuition just doesn't work that way. You have to open yourself, let it come. But you need an intent to guide what it is you're doing. If you just open with no intent, then you just get stuff, but it doesn't necessarily relate to anything. And you'll find that as you build confidence, the intuitive side is easier and easier to get to. And the only way to build confidence is just through practice. The more confidence you have in it, it's just there. The more fear you have in, I just can't seem to get a hold of it. I try, but nothing comes, this sort of thing. Then you're having trouble making your intellect be quiet, and you're trying too hard. Again, you can't force the intuitive side. You just have to let it come. And maybe you're not ready yet. Maybe your intellectual side is not yet prepared. So the intuitive side can't really tell you much. So that's kind of a short lecture on intuition and your intuitive side and creativity. You just have to practice. Now, you can get to that intuitive side two ways. One way is through meditation. And that's kind of the standard way, you know, and the reason meditation is valuable is because meditation is where we learn to tell our intellect to be quiet. That's the whole point of meditation. You get into a position where you have no thoughts. That means you shut your intellect down. And then you can have an intent and open, and now you're connected to your intuitive side. So that's kind of the point of meditation, is to learn that as a skill. That's a skill set. Just like if you're a painter, there's certain skills you have to know about brush strokes and colors and things. You know, you gotta be prepared first. But there's another way. You can also do it through your imagination. You don't have to do it through meditation. You can use your imagination to imagine things, and then if you can let those things you imagine take on a life of their own, to where you're no longer making up the story's just unwinding on its own, well, that puts you in that same space. Because how do you get it such that the story processes on its own? You make your intellect sit down and be quiet. That's how you do it. You see, it gets you in the same place. Meditation, you purposely tell your intellect to be quiet. When you do your imagination, you just let the story go on by itself. You start with your intellect making up the story, making up what you're going to do, but you get so involved in the story. So it has to be an interesting story, something you can get real involved in. You get so involved in the story that you stop making it up, and you just are part of the story. Well, you're in the same place now. Your intellect has shut down, and you're in that intuitive space. Now you can use that direction, that cognitive function that's on the intuitive side that gives you direction to focus your intent on what you want to do, and then get the information. So all of this is probably easier to say than it is to do. It's probably easier to understand intellectually than it is actually to implement it, but it's just practice. And like anything, it takes a lot of practice to get good at something. Confidence helps, but confidence only comes with practice. Fear is the big problem. When you don't have confidence, you have fear. And when you have fear, that intellect is all over it. That ego is all over what's going on. It's judging and assessing everything because you have maybe a fear that you can't do it or you're not good at it. So getting rid of fear, becoming confident, that just comes with time.
Did that answer your question, Guillaume?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Tom. I guess I'm gonna be there on the next Tom Park events to work on my imagination then.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah. Well, that's what the Tom Spark is there to do, to help people, because your ability to imagine also has to be developed. There's an awful lot of people, if you tell them to imagine something, they have a hard time with that. They don't have much imagination. That's a tool. That's a tool set you have to develop. It's just like the meditation. Most people, when they first start to meditate, they're not very good at it. You have to practice it. Most people aren't real good with their imagination either. But that's the Tom Spark idea. You've got all these fun things to do there, and that helps you develop your skills and imagination. And then as you get better, then you shift over to doing things that are more significant. So that also takes practice.
Okay, well, let's move on to our next question.
All right. The first question is, what is your perspective on consuming eggs? Have you noticed any ill health effects? Also, what about using Bluetooth devices such as wireless headphones and internet? Have you noticed them to be harmful in your experience?
Okay, two things: eggs and Bluetooth. Interestingly enough, when I was just beginning, early 1970s down this path, and had been meditating then for probably 3 or 4 years, I had a friend where I worked who had chickens and came in with a bunch of eggs and said, "I got more eggs than I can eat. Would you like some eggs?" And I took his eggs and I ate one of those eggs, and I had to give the rest of them back to him because I said, "Your eggs make me angry. Your eggs make me anxious." Now, I'd never had that experience before, and I asked him, "What do you feed those chickens? What is it about those eggs that do that?" So there's lots of things you can get in food, and not just eggs, but just food in general. And I think it has more to do with what the chickens ate, what was in the feed, than it had to do with the process of chickens laying eggs. Little trace elements of whatever, that they put in the food. So yes, and it's not just eggs, but there's lots of different foods. If you're sensitive to your awareness, you're sensitive to your state of mind, you're sensitive to your consciousness, then you'll see that a lot of foods will affect your consciousness, affect your attitude, affect the way you feel about things. Now, in general, just talking about eggs in general, I avoid eggs, but one of the reasons I avoid eggs is because one of the worst foods that you can eat if you have prostate issues. And if you're male and you're over 50, you probably either have prostate issues or you're in the process of creating prostate issues, because the prostate just tends to enlarge with time in males. It's just the way it is. And that enlarging prostate, then, you can shift that to prostate cancer, but an enlarged prostate also creates some of its own issues, and without considering even the cancer part to it. So eggs are one of the things that make that problem worse. So I don't eat eggs. So that would depend partly on your age. You don't have prostate issues if you're just turned, 35, 34? What was it, Adam? Yeah.
34 for me.
Yeah, 34, then you don't worry about your prostate at 34. It just does what it does. So I would say be sensitive, Abdul, to all the foods that you eat. And if you have a food and it's kind of new, or even if you just want to test them, put yourself in a meditation state. Relax, get into that intuitive state that you can really feel your mind, your consciousness. You're very aware of your body and how your mind feels, and then eat some of it while you're in that state, or go immediately back into that state. If you can't eat and be in that state at the same time, then immediately go back and just kind of be with it and see how it feels. See how your mind changes just because you ate that particular thing. And you'll be surprised how much effect your mind, food has on your mind, how much effect it has. It has a lot of effect. We don't notice it in general because, one, we're not very aware of our minds. We're not very aware of how they feel. They're just there and we use them. But, we know if we get a headache, if it's something really massive, then we're aware of it. But mostly we're not aware of that sort of thing. We just keep on going. So check it out with a good meditation state and see how you react to it. Okay, so eggs are off my list. A couple of other things aren't good for prostate too, and one of them is meat. And this is one of those cases where it's not red meat, chicken, fish, the meats that are usually, people say are more healthy. These things are worse for prostate. So it just depends on you and what your health issues are, how you work, how your body works. Everybody's a little different there. But I first found out that sugar was a problem for me by going into getting into a meditation state, which I could do in seconds. It didn't take very long. And just while I was in that state, having a bite of some sort of food and seeing what happened to my mind. And I would find that, suddenly the mind was kind of clear in here and then just got fuzzy, just somehow filled full of cotton there. And I wouldn't have been aware of that if I hadn't been in a meditation state. And then I realized that after I had that sugar, if I shook my head like this or like that, just give it a fast shake, my head would hurt. And I called that a shaking headache. And if I got any sugar at all, I ended up with one of these shaking headaches. And I also found that I get that from preservatives. I got it from a lot of foods. It actually affects your mind. It affects what you can think, how you think. So it's a good question, Abdul, because it's important. Now, what about Bluetooth? Well, Bluetooth is a microwave. It's an electromagnetic wave. It's not. There's a couple of communication things that we have, and one of them is infrared is a communicator, and then sometimes light is the communicator. But most of things that communicate tend to be acoustic can also be a communicator, like our voice. But most of the things we get out of machines and computers is electromagnetic, and Bluetooth is just an E&M field. Well, so is light in the E&M field, but it's a much lower frequency E&M field. Now, the question is that healthy? Is that a problem? And I'd say that now we don't know. We do know that it's not a quick problem. If you get exposed to Bluetooth, there's thousands, there's millions, there's probably hundreds of millions of people that get exposed to Bluetooth and to, you put your router on, your router now is sending the signals everywhere. You have your telephone, and it's not just the Bluetooth in the telephone, but that telephone is sending signals by the second out the towers, checking what tower's closest. So that phone, even if you're not using it, every second or so, it's going out, finding a tower, looking at the closest one, trading data with it. It's staying connected to the network all the time. As you drive around and walk around, if your phone's turned on, it's transmitting and receiving all the time, not just when you get a call. So we know, like most radiation, and that's electromagnetic radiation, like most radiation, it can have negative effects on the body, but usually not instantly. It's a matter of probability and accumulation. It's the same way that if you get exposed to a very highly radioactive source, right? So you have these radioactive sources that you can buy, and medicine uses them, and physicists use them, and other people do. And some of them are quite highly radioactive. And you wear a badge when you work with radioactive substances. You wear this radiation badge. And the radiation badge will turn color. It exposes depending on how much radiation you get. So depending on whether you get a little radiation or a lot of radiation, and depending how much radiation you get over, say, a 10-year decade or during your life, that will determine whether or not that radiation ends up giving you health problems or not. It's just probability. So when radiation interacts with your body, let's just make it simple. This is not exactly the way it works, but I'm making it a metaphor that's simple enough to understand it. Say that when radiation interacts with your body, there's 1 in a 50 million, or let's say 1 in 100 million, that's going to do damage, that will grow or that will persist, that will end up being part of a physical problem. So 1 in 100 million, say. But you're getting millions of particles, millions of E&M radiation through you all the time. And if you got a cell phone in your pocket, then you get more. If you don't have a cell phone in pockets, you get less. If you live next to a big, transfer line, then you've got a lot of E&M, a big electrical transfer substation or something, then you're getting more. If you don't, if you live out in the country, then you get less. But you're always getting some. There's radio and communication waves that are transmitted from satellites, and they spread over the whole country. That's how you can get XM, Sirius radio, because the whole country is being swathed in electromagnetic radiation. Radios, televisions, all the transmissions, it's E&M radiation. So even if your spark plugs in your car create E&M radiation, your body creates it. So there's lots of this stuff. And there's just a probability that any of that will cause problems. Usually, the higher the frequency, which means the more energy the particle has, okay, the more likely it is to do some damage. So if it's a real low frequency radiation, then it's less likely to do any damage. If it's a much higher frequency, then it's more likely to do some damage. That's just kind of general rule. So, we don't get damaged by visible light, but we do get more damage. The probability of getting damage goes up with, say, something as energetic as a X-ray. Okay. Now, the X-ray is much higher energy than visible light. So if you get a lot of X-ray, the probability that an X-ray will do damage is maybe 1 in 100,000 rather than 1 in 100 million. You see? So carrying that cell phone around or any kind of device that's constantly giving you radiation, it's like Russian roulette, but instead of only, 6 rounds that are carried at one time, and every time you pull the trigger, it's 1 in 6, it's like there's 100 million rounds. And it's only got one bullet in there. And each time you pull the trigger, you have a very low probability, but eventually the damage will collect and accumulate over time. So it's not like if that little bit of damage is collective, it's cumulative. So I think that this is my own viewpoint. I don't carry a cell phone around with me. I keep one in the car because when I'm in the car, that's the only way I can communicate with people, or they with me. So I keep one there in the car, but I don't stick it in my pocket and live with it day by day. Why? Because I don't need to. It's not necessary for what I do and who I am, so I don't have to. So I don't, because we're not going to know for probably another 20 years whether it's going to be harmful or not. So this is a case where the populations of the world, particularly in the more technical places, the places that have more technology, the citizens, the people, are the guinea pigs. We don't know. We know that radiation can hurt, but is a cell phone going to hurt people? Well, we have some evidence that it does. We have some evidence that, but it's not so much. What you get is better than what you lose. It's always a cost-benefit analysis. If 100 million people get an advantage and only 100 people die from it, well, we'll just say, too bad, those 100 people, they'll just die from it because 100 million people get a really good advantage from it. Our medicines are the same way. There's say, well, you give this medicine to 100 million people, and some of them are going to be allergic to it, and it'll kill them. But if it cures, a lot more, then that's just a benefit-risk analysis that says that's the way it is. And the radiation is going to be sort of like that. It's going to hurt some people, but if it is more benefit than it is risk, than it is damage, then we'll use it anyway. And those people that get hurt or killed by it, well, that's just the way it is. That's the way we humans think about things. So that'll be it. And I think we'll see that with cell phones. So right now, yes, we see that brain cancer, particularly among kids, has gone up a whole lot. Well, now we have a lot of kids walking around with cell phones stuck in their ear all the time. So maybe that's it, but it's not so much that it's really caused much of a ripple in a society, unless it happens to be you or your kid, then it's very important. But there's billions of us using cell phones, and they've become an important part of our life. So are we willing to accept the risk? And those who happen to be sensitive to it, those who happen to be unlucky, because the probabilities just don't work well for them, then that's the price we pay. Internet is something that is very necessary for me. It's how I communicate. That's how I work. That's how we're sitting in here talking. All of us are connected to an internet someplace, and we got routers in our houses. Otherwise, we couldn't do this. So that's important enough. I take the risk. So there's no easy answer, Abdul, to that, like leave it alone or not. It may never bother you. It may kill you. If it kills you, you'll just be 1 in 100 million people. But out of 8 billion people, 1 in 100 million is thousands of people. That's a lot of people still. It's many thousands of people. So yes, it does have risk. But what you do is you try to deal with that risk as best you can. Like for me, I don't carry a cell phone with me because I don't need a cell phone. I've got phones all over my house and they're all voice over IP. Well, IP, I've got to have a router because my cell phones use a router. That's the world we live in. We go to 5G, there's a lot more radiation out there now, a lot stronger radiation. People aren't just falling over, but it's only been around now for 5 years or less. When it's been around for 30 years or 40 years, then we'll know. Suddenly the incidence in brain cancer goes up by 500%, then people are going to say, whoops, giving your child a cell phone when they're 8 years old is probably a bad idea. Maybe that ought to be something you're a little more careful with. So anyway, no easy answer, Abdul. It's just risk that is, most of us take some of that risk because of the culture we live in. We can't get along without phones and communication equipment. And the risk seems to be relatively small for an individual, but out of millions and millions of individuals, it's going to kill some people. And how many it's going to kill? Well, as far as 5G goes, let's talk about it in 30 years or 35 years. We'll know. But until then, we won't have any idea because damage by radiation is cumulative.